My name is Dave Fellows. I was born in the small village of Hurstby-upon-Point in the middle of Sussex, 1924. My father was an engineer, and we eventually moved from Hurstby-upon-Point and went to a little village in Surrey called Long Ditton. And that took us up to the time around about 1939, and of course that was the year the war started. Now what happened next was my father was unfortunately sent up to Scotland to work as an engineer, and he thought, well, he was going to take his family with him. You know, it was after all a safer place than just being outside London. So we moved to Scotland. I can't say I really enjoyed that little difference up there, because the school I went to first of all was co-ed, where I was used to a boys' school, or as a man's school as I used to say. Anyhow, the Air Training Corps was formed, and I quickly joined the Air Training Corps because I had an interest in aeroplanes, making model aeroplanes. My father used to help me. It was a good life, and when it came, I joined the ATC. And then I passed the aircrew selection examinations, and when I was 16 and a half, coming on 17, I nipped up to Edinburgh to volunteer for the Royal Air Force, not wanting to be, of course, to have to go into the Army, the Navy, or even perhaps becoming a Bevin boy, which a lot of people did to do. So anyhow, I went up to Edinburgh, I sat in the exams and everything else, and I came back home with a little badge saying RAFVR, and I had a number, and I was told to go home and wait. So I went home and waited and told my father. My father wasn't too pleased about this because he had been in the First World War and he knew what, you know, war was like. Anyhow, he couldn't do much about it. I was in, and eventually, of course, they called me up, and I went first of all down to a place called ACRC, that's an Aircrew Receiving Centre, that was at St John's Wood in London, near Lord's Cricket Ground. Went down there, and there you were introduced to the ways of the Royal Air Force. You got your uniform provided to you, and generally learned about the Royal Air Force. One of the funny things I do remember is, though, that we went to Lord's Cricket Ground and we were issued with our greatcoats, and there was a corporal going around and we'd all got our greatcoats on, and he was measuring the distance from the hem of the greatcoat down to the ground. It had to be a certain length. And if I remember right, I think it was around about 22 inches. That was one of the funny little sides that we used to see. Also, there was a case of course, you had to have your, what we call jabs, you know, anti-tetanus and all this kind of thing. And it was done at a small little building in an avenue of big houses. And you were all lined up in a row, jackets off on the arm they were going to use, sleeves rolled up, and as you just marched along, and when you got to the open door, you got your jab. Some poor people, of course, they did pass out, you know. They fainted and passed out. Anyhow, you had your jabs, and that was that. The other good thing was feeding. Now, you won't really believe this, but we used to go across to the zoo and have our meals in the restaurant. It wasn't really open to the public. It was just there for the convenience of us to have our meals. And we used to say even the monkeys wouldn't eat our food. But anyhow. Anyhow, after 2 or 3 weeks at ACRC, one left there and one went to a place called ITW, Initial Training Wing, where you learnt all about basic aeroplanes, airmanship, gunnery, Morse code, meteorology, everything appertaining to flying. You were there, I suppose, 3 months. And there you went to elementary flying training school. This I did up at Longtown in Carlisle. And you flew Tiger Moths and you were expected to go solo in about 8.5 hours. Well, that went all right, but no problem. But from there, you were normally posted to a place called Heaton Park at Manchester. Not a very nice place at any time, but then in winter time it was worse. Manchester in wet weather, no. And it was from here that you would go overseas to finish your training, either to Canada or down to South Africa. Well, I've been there about 4 or 5 weeks. Nothing was really happening. There was a hold up in transport because you had to go with a convoy, of course, to these other places. A notice went up in the orderly room saying you can be an air gunner in a month. So I thought, that's right, if I want to get into this war, I'm going to have to do something about it. And so I just remustered. And I went down to Pembrey, #1 Air Gunnery Training School. And there, after a month or so, I passed out. And there, it was there that you got your brevet and you got your 3 stripes on your arm. And you went on leave. Now, when you're on leave, of course, they don't know what you're going, well, you don't know what's going to happen to yourself. You wait until they tell you. And then I got a posting to 30 OTU, Operational Training Unit. This was at Hixon in Staffordshire. So, okay, I got on a train, went down as far as Crewe, changed at Crewe for Stafford. I was sitting in this carriage waiting for the train to go, and in walked 3 Australian flight sergeants. They'd come down from Scotland, the Advanced Flying Training School, and they were going to there. Got talking to them, and I said to one of them, I said, well, whereabouts in Australia do you come from? So he says, mate, Sydney. So I said, I've got an aunt who lives in Sydney, went out there just after the First World War. She and her husband, they've got a sports business. He said, whereabouts? I said, in the district called Marrickville. Marrickville, he said, you can remember the road where she lives? I said, yeah, of course I can. Illawarra Road. Well, he said, this is a bit odd. He says, because I live just round the corner. He said, what's your aunt's name? I said, Mrs. Ivy Evans. Another good Australian word came out. My aunt was a friend of his mother. Huh. So it was a coincidence. And so he said to me, well, if we're on the same course, will you come and fly with me? Because we had something in common already. And so I said, yeah, of course. But we were on the same course. And then at OTU, of course, is the place where you get crewed up. So we had to look for another gunner, which I didn't find. I found one that had been on at #1 gunnery school near with me. We looked for a wireless operator. He was an Australian who also came from Sydney. We then had to look for a navigator. We were looking around. We wanted a studious, bushy-eyed type, you know, who knew what he was doing. We found the navigator and the bomb aimer, who was a Scot. He was a good lad. He had been an apprentice telephone engineer, and he could back dial, so you could get free telephone calls home. And, you know, life wasn't bad really.